Good morning, students. I am Shantagoda, lecturer in biology and principal, VKC PUC College, Sirgupa. So today, I will explain some of the lessons of your first PUC biology topic. Regarding this syllabus, first PUC biology syllabus is concerned, we have to study about 5 different units. Unit number 1, the diversity in the living world. Diversity in the living world. So this is your first unit of first PUC syllabus. In this first unit, you are supposed to study 4 different lessons. One is the living world. Second one is biological classification. Third one is plant kingdom. And fourth lesson from this unit is animal kingdom. So in this way, from the first unit, you have to study 4 lessons. And your second unit is, unit number 2 is structural organization. Structural organization in plants and animals. So this is your unit number 2. So from this unit, you have to study 3 lessons. One is morphology of flowering plants. Morphology for flowering plants. So now you can understand, you have to study about the external characteristics of a plants. And another one is anatomy. Second lesson from this unit is anatomy of flowering plants. And third lesson from this unit is once again structural organization. Structural organization in animals. So now, what are you have to study from this unit? So you have to study about only external characteristic of plants. You have to study about root and root system, stem, functions, structure, and all these things regarding flower. Entire morphology of flowering plants you have to study from this unit. And when it comes to the second lesson, you have to take the section of the plant and you have to understand about the different types of plant tissues. Basically, you have to understand about the different types of plant tissues and organization of different tissues you have to understand in this second lesson of this unit. And another one is in the third lesson of this unit, you should understand about animal tissues and the type of study of some of the animals as per the syllabus. So now this is the second unit of your syllabus. And when we move to the third one is, third unit of your syllabus is the cell. Okay, structure and function. Structure and function. So this is the third unit of your syllabus first PUC. In this you have to study about 3 different lessons. One is cell, the basic unit of life. Basic unit of life. Cell is a basic unit of life. I think you know that very well. The basic unit. Without a cell, no life, no living organisms. So you have to study in detail about the cell and its components in this lesson. And next one is, okay, you know that very well. The entire life is formed by the aggregation of various chemical substances. So that you have to understand about different biological molecules. So that next lesson is biomolecules or biological molecules. Biological molecules. So what is the meaning of this biological molecule? Chemical substances which are present in a cell or in the living system. They are all collectively known as biological molecules. And next one is cell division or cell cycle. Cell cycle and cell division, you have to understand. Cell cycle and cell division. So this is third lesson from this unit. Okay, and from the point of examination, these three lessons are very, very important. And since a student of biology, you must understand about biological molecules and biochemistry, what we can call it as a biochemistry, and which is very, very important for a future of a student. And fourth unit as per your syllabus is plant physiology. Plant physiology. Okay. So here you have to understand about physiology. Being a first PUC student, you might feel little bit difficulty to understand these terminologies. Physiology is nothing but it is a study of functions of different organs and organ systems. So that here you have to understand about how plant functions takes place. Physiological process, different life processes takes place in the plant body, that you have to understand. And here you have to understand about different lessons that I will discuss in the next content. And another one is animal physiology. Next unit is animal physiology. In animal physiology, again, you have to understand about different physiological process of animals, or particularly you have to understand about human being. So therefore, which is known as a human physiology. So here you have to understand about human physiology. And for a student who is aiming to get through the NEET examination and wants to become a professional doctor, and the student should know about this human physiological process. And here you have to study 6 to 7 different lessons. And these two units are very, very important from the point of a NEET examination. Okay, in the NEET, several times they have asked maximum number of questions from these two units. Okay, so this is all about the content basis of first PUC or the syllabus which I have written on the board. Okay, now let us start to discuss the first unit of your syllabus, that is diversity in the living world. Let us start with this unit. Now, so diversity in the living world. So I wanted to clarify certain things here. Diversity in the living world, you have to understand different meanings of different words here. First of all, you have to understand what is the meaning of a diversity and what is living. So these are two words for which you should get a meaning. You have to understand the meaning. Now, what is the meaning of a living? We will study this now. In the first lesson, we have to understand. Okay, living is nothing but individual which possess some specific characteristics. What are those specific characteristics? Like the individual has to grow, individual has to reproduce, the individual has to undergo metabolism, and it will have consciousness, and it has to respond to its surrounding. Okay, so these are all some unique features, and those individuals which possess all these characteristics is called as living. And whatever properties, whatever the characteristics just I told, these characteristics will not be there in case of a non-living thing. In a non-living object, these characteristics will not be there. And whatever characteristics the individual possesses, these characteristics, that individual is considered as a living. Now, I think now you have understood the meaning of a living, and why the word the diversity has come. Diversity is nothing but there is no single individual in the biosphere or on the earth, there are variety and variability of organisms present on the earth. Different organisms present on the earth. They are different from one to another in several characteristics. Okay, not only in one characteristics. Their way of living is different. Just I can tell you an example. Some are living in the water, some are living on the land, some are living in the air, some are living in the trees. So like that, different organisms are living in different living places. Okay, technically we call it as a habitat. So what it shows, what it indicates? It shows that there is a diversity in the living world. Okay, that just a simple I can quote an example. Okay, suppose if you think of the living place or a habitat as a water. Water is a habitat for the living organisms. So all the living organisms cannot live on the surface. Some are living on the surface of the water, some are living a little bit depth of the water, and some are living at a greater depth of the water. So in that way, again there is a diversity in the living organisms which are present, which are living in the water environment or in the water medium only. So wherever you go, there where living organisms are present, there is a diversity among them. So just I have taken an example of their living place or a habitat. Or otherwise, in a simplest manner to understand this the meaning of a diversity, just if you think of a plant leaf, let us take an example of a leaf. So there are great differences in the shape of the leaf, size of the leaf, number of the leaf, color of the leaf. Generally color is green only, but even then there are differences. So in this, why these differences are there in a particular structure? All these differences are collectively known as diversity. So that we have to understand as much as possible how there is a diversity in the living world. So this is the main concept of the first unit, that is diversity in the living world. Okay, so I told you already, in this lesson you have to understand about, from this unit you have to understand about 4 different lessons. First one is the living world. The living world is the first lesson. Let us study about first lesson, the living world. The living world. So in the first unit, from the first unit, you have to understand about the first lesson, that is living world. In this living world, you have to study 4 different concepts. One is what is living. Just I can write what are the areas you are supposed to study. First one is, so from this first lesson, you have to study what is living. As per the syllabus I am talking, what is living. So this is the first content of your syllabus. Second one is, once again, the diversity. Once again, you have to understand about diversity in the living world. Diversity in the living world. So this is second content from this first lesson only. And the third one is taxonomic categories. Taxonomic categories. Okay, and fourth one is taxonomic aids. So these are 4 different contents you are supposed to study from this first lesson of the first unit. Now let us come to this first content is what is living. I have already told you what is living. Now let us discuss what is living. Okay, so this living, any individual, the individual which have some characteristics like growth. So features or characteristics like growth. That individual should have some special features like growth, and another one is reproduction. It must have, that individual should have it should have the characteristic like reproduction, and metabolism. Okay, and another one is consciousness. Okay, so these are all some, just I can tell you some important features Okay, those individuals which possess at least these characteristics are considered as living. Still there are many features. So being a student of first PUC, and you must know in detail about these characteristics. So that now, how do you define this living is the individual which must have characteristics like growth, reproduction, metabolism, consciousness, self-regulation, self-responding. These characteristics, which the individual which possesses all these characteristics is considered as living. Okay, I hope now you are clear with the definition for living. Suppose if we take an example of a duster. So now I am using this duster to rub the board or erase the things which I have written here, and this will not grow, duster will not grow, and it cannot reproduce, and there is no property of metabolism in this, therefore this cannot be considered as living, and it is a non-living one. Okay, so now so in the examination you may get a question that what is living. This question may be asked for 1 mark. What is living? Then just simply you can write this definition: the individual which possesses characteristics like growth, reproduction, metabolism, consciousness, self-regulation is called as living. That is enough. So you have to mention some of the characteristics of the living. Or otherwise, sometimes they may ask a question, mention the characters, mention the characteristics of living. Sometimes they may ask a question like this in the examination. Mention the character, mention, just you have to write these characteristics only, you have to write one by one, so that you will get half mark for mentioning each characteristic. Okay, so in this way, so you may get any one from this. There is a chance to get a question in the examination like this. Okay, so as per text, as per the syllabus, we have to discuss in detail about each and every characteristic of a living organism. We have to discuss about each one. We have to discuss in detail about growth. We have to discuss about reproduction in detail, metabolism in detail. So this is as per the syllabus or as per the text. Now let us discuss each and every characteristic in detail. Now let us move to the first property, that is growth. Okay, let us discuss about growth. So now why I have written here the word growth. Growth is a characteristic of a living organisms. Now, as per your syllabus, you have to understand what is the meaning of a growth. Sometimes they may ask this question just for 1 mark, what is growth? Then you are not required to write entire things, just you should give a definition for the growth. Different people will give a different definitions for the growth. Okay, but we have to stick on to the text, NCERT's textbook we have to stick on here. Okay, the general meaning of a growth is increase, irreversible increase. Whatever which is irreversibly increased, that is what we call it as a growth. Okay, but here for the growth I can tell you, suppose if let us take an example of some organisms. Suppose the selected area, specified area. Suppose if there are 2 insects present. Okay, if these 2 insects by some or other process, by reproduction or by any other means, if the number is increased to 20, 2 insects have become 20. Here what change has taken place here? There is a increase in the number, increase in number of the individuals, increase in the number. It may be individual or it may be cell or it may be tissue, whatever it may be, it is increase here. And another one is when there is an increase in the number and even biological mass, biomass, mass also increases, mass increases. So that here increase in the number and increase in the mass are 2 twin characters, 2 twin characteristics. Characteristics are important to terms which we can use simultaneously, therefore it is considered as a twin characteristics of growth. So here from the point of examination, from the point of CET or NEET, which is very important term. Here you have to understand the concept. Okay, what is the meaning here? Why? Growth, I can generalize the definition is increase, irreversible increase. Irreversible increase in the height, irreversible increase in the whatever irreversible increase. Once if it is increased, it cannot be decreased. That is considered as a growth. But here we have to stick on to the text. Okay, increase in the number. I have shown here number. Number means what? Whether it may be number of individuals or it may be number of cells in the body or number of tissues, whatever it is increase in the number. When there is increase in the number, there is increase in the mass also. So that increase in the number and increase in the mass are twin characteristics of a growth. Okay, this is what we have to understand here. Now, next question arises whether growth occurs in unicellular organisms or multicellular organisms. So definitely when it is a living, whether it is a unicellular or multicellular, growth will be there in every living organisms. So growth takes place both in multicellular and unicellular organisms. Growth is a property or a characteristic of both multicellular and unicellular organisms. Multicellular, I think for children who are coming from 10th standard and regional language, sometimes they may find difficulty in understanding certain terminologies. Just I wanted to clear here. Multi means many. Okay, uni means single or one. Okay, those organisms whose body is made up of many cells are called as multicellular organisms. Individual are the organism whose body is made up of many cells are called as multicellular organisms, and those organisms whose body is made up of only one cell are called unicellular organisms. So in this way we can classify organisms into different types. Now you can notice the growth in both multicellular organisms as well as in case of unicellular organisms. Growth is there, definitely. But now question arises here, there are several multicellular organisms present in the universe, in the biosphere. So here multicellular organisms are mainly we can see plants and another one is animals. Plants and animals are the major group of multicellular animals. Now it is this all little bit funny and childish also. How growth takes place in plants and how growth takes place in animals? What is the difference in the growth of plants and animals? That question arises in our mind. So now I will clear this. In case of plants, in plants growth occurs continuously. Growth is continuously throughout their lifespan. Growth takes place continuously throughout their lifespan. Throughout their lifespan by a process known as cell division. By a process called as cell division. By cell division only, growth takes place continuously throughout their lifespan. Here you have to understand, in case of plants, growth is a continuous process. How long? Throughout their lifespan. And how it takes place? By a cell division. So that the cell division is a process by which growth takes place in case of plants. And similarly, when we move to the animals, in case of animals also, growth takes place by cell division, but only up to certain age. Now, you can notice the major difference between growth in case of plants and growth in case of animals. In case of plants, growth is continuous throughout their lifespan, but in case of animals, it gets stopped at a particular age. Different animals, in different animals, there is a different age at which the growth will be ceased. So but in case of both plants and animals, since they are multicellular animals, and growth takes place by a process known as cell division. So now you can notice what are all the characteristics of a growth. So these are all the sentences which are given in the textbook, NCERT textbook only. One more thing is, now I have completed this how growth takes place in case of a multicellular organisms, when we come to the unicellular organisms, it is very interesting here. In case of unicellular organisms, growth can be observed in vitro. Growth can be observed in vitro. In vitro, so you have to understand meaning of certain terminologies in biology. Okay, so in vitro, children, you must remember, one is what is the meaning of in vitro, and another term is in vivo. In vitro is outside. In vitro is outside, and in vivo is inside the body. So this is outside the body and this is inside the body. Okay, so now in vitro means here, if you take any unicellular organisms, like if I use bacteria, if I take a bacteria and we can take a bacteria and we can culture them in a culture medium. So if there are larger animals, I wanted to tell you that if there are larger animals, we can domesticate. If it is a plant, we can cultivate, but it is not possible for microorganisms to domesticate. Okay, therefore we have to culture them. We can culture the microorganisms. Suppose if I use some 100 microorganisms here in the culture medium, after some time they may become 1000 if they increase to 1000. So what has happened here? The number of microbes increased in the culture medium here. Increased. Okay, so that now I can come to the first point here, increase in the number of microorganisms. When there is increase in the number, automatically there is increase in the biomass also. So that we can consider it as a growth in case of unicellular organisms. But very interestingly, this growth in case of unicellular organisms can be observed in vitro just simply by counting the number. Just by counting the number of individuals, you can understand the growth. Just by counting the number of organisms. Initially there were 100, it is increased to 1000 we have counted here. It is possible to count in case of unicellular organisms. But in case of multicellular organisms like plants and animals, cell division takes place inside the body. It's not possible to count the number of cells which are formed by the process of a cell division. Here it is not possible, but in case of unicellular organisms, it is possible to count the number of cells. So in this way, so we can understand the difference between growth in unicellular organisms and also growth in case of a multicellular organisms. And again, in multicellular organisms, what are the difference between the growth in case of plants and another one is growth in case of animals? Okay, besides all these things, now we get a question in our mind. Is there any non-living object which can grow? Non-living object can grow. Okay, this question sometimes some children may get in their mind. For that, I can give an answer. Even non-living object can also grow. Okay, we cannot reject this. Even non-living object also can grow. How it grows? Non-living object. Okay, it means living things can grow and even non-living things can also grow. Then you may pose a question, why we should consider growth as a property or a characteristic of living organisms? Certainly, I can tell you, this non-living, since non-living objects also can grow, therefore, growth cannot be considered as the property, primary property or basic characteristic of a living organisms. So therefore, it is not a defining characteristic of a living organism. Growth is not a defining property. Why growth is not a defining property? Because even non-living objects also exhibit this property. Okay, this property is there even in non-living things also. But one more thing is, in growth in case of a living organisms and growth in case of a non-living objects, there are certain differences. Now, what are those differences you can notice between growth in case of a non-living objects and in case of a living things? Okay, in case of non-living things, growth occurs from outside. Growth occurs on its outer surface. Okay, suppose if there is any non-living object like a mountain, non-living objects like mountain, okay, sand mounds, boulders. So these are all certain examples of non-living objects which are mentioned in our textbook, and they can also exhibit a growth. Here, growth takes place due to accumulation of materials on its outer surface. Accumulation of materials on its outer surface, growth occurs in case of a non-living objects. And in case of a living things or in living organisms, growth occurs from inside. Growth occurs from inside. Okay, so if there is a living organism, okay, changes takes place inside the body or not from outside. Okay, we can understand as we are animals. Okay, so no changes takes place on our outer surface of the body. Whatever changes takes place, they takes place from inside the body, in our body, within our body only. Okay, so in this way what happens, growth can, in case of living organisms, for the growth, changes takes place inside the body in all living organisms. Okay, so growth occurs from inside the body, and in case of non-living things, okay, for their growth, some materials get or substances get accumulated on their outer surface, by which what happens, growth occurs in case of non-living organisms. Anyway, non-living things. Anyway, so since it is also there, growth is also present in non-living objects, therefore growth cannot be considered as a property of or a defining property of a living organisms. Okay, so in this way we can explain about growth. Sometimes in the examination they may ask a question, what is growth, or write the twin characteristics of growth. In this way they can ask a question, or otherwise explain growth as the characteristic of a living organism. Then you have to write briefly all these things. Okay, after this let us move to another characteristic of a living, that is reproduction. Reproduction, okay, this can be defined in many ways. Okay, you can understand the term. I think you have studied already the word reproduction from your lower classes, from primary school itself. You might have studied the word reproduction. The term itself indicates, I have put an underline here, production, reproduction. It means production of an individual. We can define in a general manner. Production of new individuals of their own kind is called as a reproduction. This is the generalized definition for reproduction. Production, just I can write generalized definition, which is not there in first PUC. In this content it is not there. Even then, just I tell you this, production of a new individual, production of new individual. How that new individual must be, and that new individual, okay, that will be like that of its parents, of the same, it's like parents. Okay, that is what we call it as a reproduction. So this is the generalized definition, production of a new individual of same kind. Okay, for example, cat can produce cat itself, lion can produce lion only, tiger can produce tiger only, mango plant can produce mango only, mango plant cannot produce neem tree, or lion cannot produce a dog. So therefore here production of new individual of their own kind is called as a reproduction. So therefore the word reproduction, means again production of same individual of the adults. So is called as a reproduction. So now in this way we can define, but as per your text, as per your syllabus, okay, reproduction is in the same way we can define. It is a production, once again, production of progeny. You must recall these terminologies are scientific words. Therefore I am writing as it is from the textbook only. Production of, instead of writing new individual, I have written a word progeny. Progeny is nothing but new individual only. Okay, it's next generation. Okay, production of progeny of more or less similar to their parents. Progeny more or less similar. What is the word? More or less? More or less similar to their parents. More or less similar to their parents. Their parents are both the parents. Their parents are both the parents. So both the parents will produce. Okay, both the parents. Both the parents I have taken here. Okay, both here individually is produced. Progeny is produced. This progeny, which will not be exactly like both the parents, it is more or less similar to both the parents. Why it is more or less similar to both the parents? Because it will receive some of the characteristics from the father, some of the characteristics from the mother, so that it will have some new characteristics. Therefore, it is not 100% similar to their parents and little bit similar or more or less similar to their parents. In this way, we can define the reproduction. Okay, when this definition is considered, okay, more or less similar to their parents, when it is considered, this definition is pertaining to sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction. It is sexual reproduction only. Whatever I have written here on the board, that is related to the sexual reproduction. Now, question arises here, is there any other methods of reproduction other than this? Okay, definitely. Now, you have to understand generally how reproduction takes place, what are the different methods of reproduction which are present in different living organisms. Okay, there are different types of reproductions. One is called as asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is a kind of reproduction which is there, which we can notice in case of a non-living living organisms, and another one is sexual reproduction. And still, these are the major type of reproductions which takes place in living organisms, which are there in living organisms. In addition to that, there are other reproductions. They are vegetative reproduction. So in this way also we can say, okay, so these are major types of reproductions which we can find, we can notice in living things. So just I told you here, this is what sexual reproduction. Still there is asexual reproduction also. One more kind of reproduction is asexual. We have to just go on giving some brief ideas about different types. Now, is there any asexual reproduction? That question arises here. Definitely, asexual reproduction also takes place. Asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction also takes place in some organisms. Now, sometimes suppose if I go on explaining like this, you may ask me a question, what is this sexual reproduction and what is this asexual reproduction, where does it take place? That you will study in detail in future classes. Even then just I can tell you simple definition or simple differences between these two. Sexual reproduction is, it involves two parents. The reproduction which involves two parents is called as a sexual reproduction. And also production of gametes takes place here. Okay, sexual cells takes place and fusion of those gametes takes place by which new individual is produced. Okay, so such a reproduction is called a sexual reproduction, and asexual reproduction is where there is no formation and fusion of gametes takes place. The kind of reproduction where formation and fusion of gametes does not take place, and with this, if new individual is produced, then the reproduction is called as asexual reproduction. Now you may ask a question that, sir, what kind of organisms which have this asexual reproduction? Now just can you give an example for the organisms in which asexual reproduction takes place? Now I can tell you some of the important examples, just a simple few examples I can tell you regarding the individuals where this asexual reproduction takes place. Okay, why I have to write these examples? Because these are the examples which are mentioned in the text. So that I can give these examples only, I am confined myself to the textual content. Now, in case of a fungi, I think you have heard the word fungi. Fungi is a kind of organism, multicellular organism. Okay, and it can reproduce. Every living organism can reproduce. How fungi reproduces? Fungi reproduces by asexual method, by the formation of spores. By the formation of spores. I have written a word here, spores. Okay, spores. So, spores means how many spores it produces. Therefore, Here it produces a large number of spores or millions of spores. It produces a millions of spores. Fungi reproduces by the formation of a millions of spores. Millions of spores it produces. Fungi reproduces by the formation of a millions of spores. Just imagine that organism, it reproduces by the formation of millions of spores. Because of that, it spreads everywhere. Fungi, since it produces a large number of spores. Spores are the asexual reproductive units. Okay, this is one of the way of reproduction, asexual reproduction in case of fungi. And one more organism is yeast. Yeast is an organism. And another one is hydra. I think you might have heard about the hydra, and you might be knowing about yeast also, but you don't know that what is this yeast. Yeast is a unicellular fungi. So I have written here fungi, this is a multicellular one. Yeast is also fungi, but it is a unicellular one. And why I joined these two organisms? This is an animal, this is a fungi. And these two organisms, they reproduce by a process known as budding. They reproduce by a process known as budding. By a process called as budding, they reproduce. Bud, they produce a small bud in case of yeast. So yeast is a unicellular and it produces a bud by cell division only. And cell division becomes unequal, so that one cell becomes larger and another cell becomes smaller. This smaller cell is considered as a bud, and this bud, after growing, it gets separated and it becomes a new yeast cell. So in this way, what happens here? Yeast reproduce by the formation of a bud. Okay, so that similarly, hydra also reproduces by the formation of a bud. So this is another kind of a asexual reproduction. Here, what you are noticing here, only one parent is involved. In case of yeast, I have taken here only one parent. In case of hydra, only one parent is involved. In case of fungi, which produces millions of spores, only one parent is present. So in this way, single parent is involved in the process of reproduction. Therefore, it is an asexual method of reproduction. And one more thing is, I can tell you one more example. Okay, so that is in case of some more fungi. Let us take an example of still some more fungi. And also filamentous algae, filamentous algae, and one more is protonema of mosses, protonema of mosses. Okay, mosses. In these organisms, all these which I have taken here, they are all filamentous only. Body is filamentous. Filamentous means thread-like. You should remember, you should note the meaning of these. Filamentous means thread-like, where body is thread-like body is present. In these organisms, what happens here? This body is broken down into small fragments. Small fragments. Now, like this, it is broken down. Body is broken down into small fragments or small pieces. Therefore, here asexual reproduction takes place by the formation, by fragmentation process. Okay, by fragmentation. So it is a kind of a reproduction, asexual reproduction here. Okay, so in this way, what happens? So we can understand here, reproduction takes place differently. And let us take one more very interesting and important example from the point of CET, that is in case of planaria. Planaria, I think you might have heard the word planaria, and which belongs to a class known as flatworms. So these are the flatworms, kind of a flatworms. Here, this individual, it reproduces by means regeneration. That is true regeneration. It reproduces by true regeneration process. Regeneration. Instead of saying regeneration, I have written here true regeneration. First of all, you have to understand the meaning of a regeneration here. What is the meaning of regeneration? Regeneration is the process by which, if any part is lost in the body or cut off, there is a chance for regrowth of that last part of the body is called as a regeneration. Okay, you may get sometimes question in the examination, define regeneration, or what is regeneration? Reformation Regeneration, you can, by just seeing the word, you can write the answer here, generation. Generation is formation. Means again. Reformation of last part of the body is called as regeneration. Every living organism has got this power, this capacity, but it is restricted in some organisms. But in case of planaria, it has high power of regeneration. Therefore, the word we have used here, true regeneration. Okay, this planaria can regenerate successfully, and high power of regeneration is present in this. Therefore, it is nothing but a true regeneration. Okay, and regeneration power is present in other organisms also, as I told you. Okay, but that is limited. And even it is there in human being also. But in our body, it is restricted only to the tissues, not to any organs or organ systems. If there is a loss of any cells or any tissues, those tissues can grow again. So that this capacity, this power which made us to heal the wounds. If there are any wounds on the body, those wounds will be healed up. That is because of the presence of a tissue regeneration in our body. But as per your syllabus, you have to understand here in case of planaria, if the body is cut into small fragments, we have already studied this in your 10th standard. Okay, so body is cut into small fragments. Each fragment, if it is cut, so this portion, if it cuts, it will grow into one individual, this grows into another individual, so that you can, if you cut them into any number of pieces, they can grow into, develop into new individual, so that it becomes the power of a regeneration. Okay, true regeneration capacity. So what you are understanding by these examples. Okay, so if I say here now this is sexual reproduction and this is asexual reproduction. With these two, I can tell you there is a diversity. Okay, diversity is there in living organisms. Okay, because some reproduces by this method, some reproduces by asexual method. Once again, among the individuals which reproduce by asexual method, still there are many ways to reproduce by asexual method. So these are all the things which explains us that there is a great diversity in the living individuals or in living things. And now question arises, you may ask a question that, sir, is there any individual in the world which cannot reproduce? Definitely, I cannot escape from your question. I have to answer for this. There are living organisms, there are living things which will not reproduce also. They cannot reproduce also. Just I can tell you an example, that is one is mule. Mule is an animal, okay, which will not reproduce, which do not have power, which do not have capacity to reproduce. Now I think you might not be knowing about the mule. Mule is an individual which is produced by act of reproduction between male donkey and female horse. Okay, so when these two individuals they reproduce, when they sexually reproduce, a new individual is produced. That new individual which is produced by the sexual act between these two, okay, that individual, what we call it as a mule, that cannot be considered as a donkey or it cannot be considered as horse, so therefore it is called as a mule. And that mule which is produced, that cannot reproduce, so therefore it is a sterile individual. Mule is a sterile individual. So since it is a living organism, it will have a property of growth, it will have other consciousness, everything is there, but it do not have a property of a or characteristic of a reproduction. Therefore reproduction cannot be considered as, because of this example, still reproduction cannot be considered as primary characteristic of this living things. And one more example I can give you, that is sterile worker bees. Okay, here worker bees are nothing but these are the honeybees. Honeybees, you know that very well. There is a diversity again in the honeybees. Okay, there is a division of labor in honeybees. Some are called as queen, some are called as males, and some individuals are called as workers. Only they work for the welfare of the the beehive, and such bees are called as worker bees, and these worker bees cannot reproduce, therefore they are called as sterile ones. They are sterile ones. This is another example. Okay, since they take a birth and they cannot reproduce at all, therefore, so this reproduction cannot be considered as the primary property or defining property of living organisms. And besides all these examples, we can take the nearest examples to us, that is in case of a sterile or infertile human couple. Every human being who got married will not produce children. Okay, some fails to produce children. That is nothing but infertility. Infertile couple, they cannot give birth to new individuals. And why some human beings cannot give birth to the children? That is because of some problems. It may be physical, it may be biological, or it may be immunological or social problems. Because of these, some people will not produce children, and so that this is another example with which we can say that reproduction is not a defining property. If we consider these characteristics, these are all living things only. Mule is a living organism, worker bees are the living organisms, human being is a living thing, but they are not able to produce new individuals, they are not able to give birth, they are not able to reproduce. So with these examples we can say that reproduction is not a defining property of living organisms. Okay, so with this only by considering reproduction we cannot define. So in this way we have discussed about how reproduction takes place in different organisms. And let us move to another characteristic of living, that is metabolism. Okay. Here next one, third one is metabolism. Metabolism. What is the meaning of this metabolism? Basically, I told you already, every living organisms, they are made up of what? They are made up of cells. Every living organisms are made up of cells, and cells are made up of various chemical substances. Cells are made up of different chemical substances, nothing other than this. These chemicals, what kind of chemical substances are present? They may be small or they may be large. Okay, these chemical substances, either they may be small or they may be large, which are present in their body. But these chemical substances, what happens in the body, these smaller chemical substances may combine together, they become larger molecules. Smaller chemical substances may become larger molecule, or sometimes these larger molecule can be broken down into smaller ones. This process will be continuously going on in the body. In every living organism, either from smaller organism to the larger organism, their body is made up of cells, and cells are made up of various chemical substances. These chemical substances, either they may be small or they may be big, and these smaller molecules can combine together and become a larger molecule, or sometimes larger molecule can be broken down into smaller molecule. This process will be continuously going on in the body since when that individual takes birth to death. This process will be continuous. This process is continuous one. What is this process? These chemical reactions to make smaller molecules into larger molecule, or larger molecule to be converted into smaller molecules. This process will be going on in the body, and all these processes are collectively known as metabolism. Metabolism is therefore sum of all the chemical reactions. Sum of all the chemical reactions which are taking place in the body is called as a metabolism. Whatever chemical reactions which takes place in the body, they are collectively known as metabolism. Okay, so just I told you why these chemical reactions takes place, because body is made up of various chemical substances, and these chemical substances, either they may be small or they may be big. Sometimes what happens is smaller molecules needs to be aggregated together to form a larger molecule. Sometimes this larger molecule requires to be converted into smaller molecule by chemical reactions. So all the chemical reactions are collectively known as metabolic reaction, and the process is known as metabolism. So this metabolism are of two different types. So this we will study in our third unit. One is catabolism. Even then I just complete this so that you can remember in your third unit only. Catabolism, and another process is called as a anabolism. So anabolism. Here catabolism is nothing but here larger molecules are converted into smaller molecules. Larger molecules are converted into smaller molecules. This process is called as a catabolism. And in case of anabolism, smaller molecules are aggregated together to form a complex molecules. Smaller molecules are converted into larger molecules or complex molecules is called as a anabolic process or anabolism. So these two terms, these two words we will study in our third unit, biological molecules. Just the situation has forced me to explain these two terminologies here. Now metabolic reactions or metabolism, chemical reactions, can is there any non-living object which can exhibit this metabolic reaction or metabolism? There is no, definitely there is no non-living object which can exhibit metabolism. But what chemical reactions takes place, such chemical reactions we can explain outside in a test tube. You can take a test tube and you can put some chemical substances which are there in the body, in the living organisms, and you can show a reaction. What reaction takes place in the test tube, how it is almost similar to the reaction which takes place in the living system. But now this reaction, surely living reaction, which is taking place in the test tube, it is a surely living reaction, but this cannot be considered as a living system. Though it is a living reaction, it cannot be considered as a living individual, living organism, because the reaction is a single. Okay, only one reaction takes place. We can explain one particular reaction in the test tube, and the related reactions cannot be continued automatically here. But in case of a living organism, one reaction if it completes, and automatically it takes up a next reaction, so that the reactions one after another reactions will be continuous. So therefore it cannot be considered as a living system, but that isolated reaction is a living reaction, and it is not possible to exhibit by any non-living objects. Therefore this metabolism is considered as one of the defining property. It is a defining property of living organisms. Defining property of living organisms here. Metabolism is considered as a defining property of living organisms because no non-living object can exhibit this. Okay, and it is not possible to show it outside. We can show only one particular reaction, but interrelated reactions it is not possible to show it, and it cannot take place automatically how it takes place in case of living individuals. Therefore metabolism is considered as a defining property of living organisms. Definitely, okay, it is a defining property. Okay, one more thing, this is one very important concept regarding these living things, and let us move to one more characteristic, that is consciousness. Consciousness, here you must be conscious to understand all these things. Consciousness, just I have given you consciousness. So what are the things you have to understand here? In case of consciousness, you should know about that. You have to understand about two terms. One is response. Every living organism exhibit this. Every living organism has got this response. How and when they get responded to a particular stimulus. They responded to a stimulus. When the stimulus is given, the individual will respond. Response to the stimulus is a basic characteristic of all the living organisms, and this characteristic we cannot find in case of non-living objects. This is there only in living individual, living organisms. Every living organism, definitely they respond to the stimulus. When the stimulus is given, when the stimulus is given, they respond to that particular stimulus. Okay, so therefore, that is why they are able to respond, because of the presence of that consciousness. The response, what we call it, is a consciousness only. And here, this is stimulus means what kind of stimulus has to be given to that living things, individual. That stimulus may be physical, physical stimulus. What is the meaning of this physical stimulus? When the living individual, living thing, when it is touched, physically it is touched by any other object, then automatically the individual gets responded. That physical contact is called as physical stimulus. Okay, when it comes in contact with its body, then we call it as a physical one, physical stimulus. Then immediately that individual will be responded. Or it may be chemical also. Stimulus may be chemical. Chemical means if there are chemical substances present in its environment, and immediately we can understand about the change. Okay, so that is nothing but a chemical stimulus, and another one is called as a biological. Okay, biological means living organisms. Okay, around us, if there are any living organisms present, we respond. Okay, suppose if there is a beautiful insect or a beautiful bird, if it is flying in front of us, immediately we get interested to see that bird or insect. Or in the same way, suppose if there is a snake which is passing in front of us, immediately also we will respond, we will run away from the place. So that is nothing but a biological stimulus. Presence of a snake before us is a stimulus, and running away from that place, so what we call it is a response. In this way, so this response to the stimulus may be physical, may be chemical, or may be biological. Okay, so anyway, different organisms will have a different responses. Suppose if may ask a question that, sir, these are the responses you can notice in case of a human being or in any other animal. But how plants, since they are living individuals, how they respond? Definitely, you can observe the movement of a plant towards the sunlight. Is a response, so they move towards the sunlight. Okay, so that is nothing but, that is what we call it as a photoperiodism. Photoperiodism is one of the property. Okay, that is a response of the plants to sunlight. Okay, in this way we can give so many examples to say that every living organism has got consciousness. The meaning of consciousness is they respond to stimulus. Okay, or otherwise this response to the stimulus we can explain in another way. Every living organism is aware of their surrounding or their environment. They are aware of their environment. That is what we call it as a response. So entire this response to the stimulus we can explain in a short word, that is aware. Every living organism is aware of their surrounding or aware of their environment. In addition to this, suppose if we come to the human being, when we think of a human being is it aware of its environment or not? Definitely he is also living thing, he is aware of his surrounding or his environment, and he has got still additional property. Okay, some extra property, that is he has got not only self-consciousness, he has got self-consciousness. Self-consciousness. Human being has got self-consciousness, or aware of himself. He is not only aware of the environment, he is aware of himself also. Okay, so that is what the speciality of the human being in addition to other organisms. Okay, and this self-consciousness, when it comes to the dead or the individual or the person who is there in coma. When person is there in coma, this self-consciousness is not applicable at that time, because he do not have consciousness at all. So therefore, the consciousness is not applicable to the person who is there in coma. But even then, we can consider this consciousness is a defining property of all living organisms, and a very, very specific and unique characteristic of living things. So I just told you 4 important properties. I explained about 4 properties. One is growth, reproduction, metabolism, and consciousness. Among 4 characteristics, metabolism and consciousness are considered as a defining property of living organisms. So because these characteristics are not exhibited by non-living things. Okay, so these are characteristics of living with which we can differentiate between living and non-living things. And one more is how these organisms, living things, respond to the stimulus, and how these metabolic reactions takes place. Okay, what makes these individuals to have this metabolism as well as consciousness? And a living phenomenon, what we call it is a living phenomenon. Okay, from where this living phenomena acquires by the individual? How they get this living phenomenon? The living phenomena is because of underlying interaction. It is because of underlying interaction. This is what you must know here. Just simply understanding characteristics of growth, reproduction, metabolism and consciousness is not sufficient. Being a student of science, you must understand this underlying meaning of this. Okay, so I can tell you this, that response to the stimulus and different chemical reactions which are taking place in the body, how they are all going on in the body of living things. To understand that, you must know about this living phenomena is because of a underlying interaction. This concept is very, very important from the NEAT part. NEAT, this is very important. Okay, so if you do not understand this, whatever we have learnt just now, they all become waste. So that's what, please children, you should understand about these things. Now, what is the meaning of this underlying interaction is very, very important. Let us take an example of tissue. Just I can tell you tissue. Okay, tissue, what is tissue? Tissue is a group of similar or dissimilar cells performing one complete function. Okay, tissue is a group of cells. Just simply you can understand. So this tissue is performing some function. It is performing a definite function. For example, just I can tell you an example: muscular tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, muscle tissue. It is a kind of a tissue. Cardiac muscle tissue is a kind of a tissue. It is performing some definite function, that is pumping of a blood. It performs the pumping of blood. So how it is able to perform that function? That is because of the interaction between different cells. Okay, these cells are able to interact among themselves, and all the cells together complete one function, that is pumping of blood. Now you may get a question in your mind that suppose any one of the cell is removed from this tissue, separated from this tissue, can this cell perform the same function as it is there when it is there in the tissue? It is not possible. When the cell is isolated from the tissue, this cell cannot perform the functions of the tissue. So this cell performs its function when cell is present along with other cells, but when it is isolated, it cannot perform its function. That is because of the interaction. So when many cells are present, when cells are present in a group, they are all together able to complete this function. That is because of underlying interaction. And when the cell is present separately, when the cell is removed, okay, it do not have that property of a tissue. Property of tissues will not be there in the isolated cell. Okay, so how it acquires? Now with this example you can understand that when the cell is separated, it cannot perform that function. When the cell is present along with other cells, it will perform that definite function. That is because of the interaction here. Here interaction is there, here interaction will not be there, therefore it will not perform its function. Okay, similarly, this cell is made up of so many cell organelles. Different cell organelles are present in a cell. Okay, if we take a cell, it has nucleus, it has mitochondria, it has ribosomes, it has lysosomes. Okay, so many cell organelles present, and different cell organelles are performing different functions. Mitochondria, production of energy, lysosomes, they can digest some molecules. So in this way, different organelles are performing different functions. Okay, so that the functions of an organelle depends upon functions of a cell organelles. It depends upon interaction between different molecules which are present in it. Different molecules. Okay, various molecules, different molecules which are present in that cell organelle. Okay, the functions of the cell organelles depends upon various molecules which are present in that cell organelle. Suppose if any molecule which is isolated from this cell organelle, can that molecule perform the functions of that cell organelle? It is not possible. That is because when these molecules are present together in a cell organelle, they can complete that function. So with these two examples, we can understand that that interaction is very, very important to complete one function. Okay, so that here the living property or living phenomena it acquires only by the process known as a interaction. So therefore, this is all about with all these things, organisms are able to respond and they are able to regulate themselves and they are able to evolve themselves. Okay, organisms are self-regulating. They are self-regulating. Organisms are able to regulate themselves. Self-regulating and self-responding and also evolving. So these are all, when we consider all these things, so now we can say that what we can say, biology is a story. It is simply we can say it is a story of life. It is a story of life on earth. It is a story of life on earth, and also it is a story of evolution. It is a story of evolution of living organisms. Okay, just what the beautiful word which is explained in our textbook. When we consider these things, we can say that it is not a syllabus, which is not a any explanation, biological explanation. It is simply we can say that it is a story of living organisms on the earth, or life on the earth, and also it is a story of evolution of living organisms on the earth. So children, with this I have completed the first content of your first lesson, that is what is living. Okay, thank you very much, and we will discuss next content in the next class. Thank you one and all.